Now that you know the steps of the policy analysis process, we then need to understand who actually does policy analysis. Policy analysis is conducted by a variety of both formal and informal political actors. Our formal political actors are those in the executive branch, those government agencies in the bureaucracy at all levels of government, be it the federal, the state, or the local. Beyond these formal actors, there are a variety of informal political actors as well. Sometimes you can have researchers, like myself, at universities who conduct policy analysis for the government. But more often, most policy analysis is conducted by think tanks and interest groups. Though similar, it's worth diving deeper into these last two informal actors to understand the difference between the two. Much of the policy analysis today comes from groups called think tanks. These organizations are full of highly skilled policy professionals. There exists great diversity among these organizations in terms of their magnitude, their specialization, as well as their partisanship. These organizations are ultimately interested in making good policy. They see their work as an asset to policymakers, helping them understand really complex problems and figuring out ways to address the problems. Often these organizations help policymakers understand the field of actors that are going to be involved in the policymaking process along with them. Yet not all organizations out there are think tanks. Many organizations seeking to influence the policy process are known as interest groups. They are similar to think tanks, yet they are very different. These groups are not stacked with policy experts, and further, they tend to be more biased or have an agenda. More often than not, these groups are committed to one side of an issue or form a particular ideology. Ultimately, any analysis they conduct and hand on to our policymakers focus on information that supports their case. Thinking about these actors involved in the policymaking process, policy analysis thus falls into three broad categories: the scientific approaches, the professional approaches, and the political approaches. All three approaches serve valid purposes, but have different goals and objectives, and ultimately use different methods and means to meet their goals. The first orientation to policy analysis is the scientific method. Typically, it's performed by informal actors in universities, again, professors, researchers. Of the three orientations, we tend to view it as the most rigorous. The goal of this orientation is to build an understanding and clarify what is known concerning the public problems. In doing so, academics build theories which are generalizations of phenomena used to predict or explain outcomes. The problem with this orientation is because its goal is to build theories, as opposed to concrete suggestion, these theories tend to be too abstract for practical application to real-world policies. The second orientation, or the professional orientation, tends to be the most useful by policymakers themselves. This orientation is employed by think tanks and uses strong professional norms of analysis to produce reports. These reports are objective and rigorous in their analysis. Their goal is to analyze policy alternatives and provide their recommendations to policymakers to make decisions. An example of an organization which fits into this orientation is the Pew Research Center. This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank which generates a lot of those surveys and polls that you often see in the news. They tap into public opinion about how the American public feels about certain policy alternatives. The last orientation is the political orientation. This is when policy analysis or research takes a position. It's mostly employed by interest groups, sometimes uses data, but makes arguments that support political positions. Given the resources that many of these interest groups have, this research can still be very high quality and of much use to policymakers. Policymakers, however, must take any research given to them by these organizations with a grain of salt, because remember, these groups are taking a position and there may be a certain amount of bias to their positions.